Finnish Cultural Fund, the Swedish Defence University, and the Finnish Security Committee. We're also in the process actually right now to investigate what are the most important topics for this autumn's executive training, and today's topic on civil defense preparedness is very closely related to this. Today's webinar will address the civil defense collaboration at large between Finland and Sweden, and I'm so delighted to welcome our distinguished guests today. First of all, our Swedish guest, Charlotte Petri Gornitzka, newly appointed Director General for the Swedish Civil Contingency Agency. Warmly welcome. Kimmo, Kohvakka, Director General, Rescue Services at the Finnish Ministry of Interior. We have Axel Hagelstam, Director for Planning and Analysis from the Finnish National Emergency Supply Agency. And finally, we have Sauli Pahlman, Deputy Director General, Head of the National Cybersecurity Center here in Finland. A fantastic panel to actually ask all, to be asked all the important questions, and also for you in the audience, you have the possibility to send us questions in the chat, and if time allows, we will pick up some of those as well. So thank you for joining us here at Hanaholmen, and let's get started with this extremely topical discussion. I will first address you, Kimmo. Sweden and Finland have a common history and are very close to each other, as we know. Yet over the years, it was both when different solutions what strengthens and what weakens our cooperation in the situation that we are right now. And what does this mean for us going forward together in strengthening our cooperation in civil defense? And also maybe you could comment on the newly presented Emergency Powers Act that the Finnish government actually proposed to the Parliament yesterday.
Thank you very much, and I'm very honored to be able to have this discussion over here, and welcome also Charlotte to this discussion. Very important questions in a whole. At this very moment, the situation, of course, in the European security, the global security, I think that it has dramatically changed during past months. We know the Russian aggression in Ukraine has created a totally new security environment when it comes to Europe and also in Nordic and also in our bilateral cooperation, let's say, surroundings. Climate change, all those cross-border threats that we might face in the future. We have actually in the Nordic countries and bilaterally with Sweden discussed a lot of what kind of adaptation we should have in accordance with the climate change, the extreme weather conditions and forest firefighting and such. And of course, it's important to discuss what kind of threat scenarios we might see in the future. But all this underlines the necessity of cooperation. Absolutely, we see from the Finnish point of view that we have been tremendously lucky to have such a partner in various civil preparedness and various aspects of societal preparedness. Like Sweden, we have been learning from each other. We have a very functioning cooperation system. We have agreements on the governmental level. Like in rescue services, you could say almost that there's no border between Finland and Sweden. If there's something as needed on both sides, we can rely on each other's help in that. We could say that the cooperation between our countries in this whole field is very functioning at the moment in all levels, in political level, practical level. So very detailed. Northern parts of Finland, there's a cross-border activity when it comes to rescue services, emergency medical services, almost daily basis. So just to put examples on that. At the moment, we are preparing to have a exercise on forthcoming firefighting period in this summer. And next week in Jämijärvi, we will have a joint exercise where we are practicing host nation support in Finnish side, of course, sharing information more widely. Swedes are sending two aeroplanes, fixed wing aeroplanes, and we are exercising aerial firefighting. And that one thing being just a practical example how we do cooperation. As you know, the Minister of Justice in Sweden and the Minister of Interior in Finland signed last year a letter of intent on deepened cooperation in this field, and that gives a very strong, actually here, and it gives us a very strong political background. And just 1.5 months ago here in Hanaholmen, they reiterated the importance of this deepened cooperation. And so we have a very strong political background. We have a good tradition when it comes to experiences of cooperation so far. And we are most definitely looking very much forward the ways ahead when it comes to, let's say, civil preparedness in various areas, civil defense, for instance, rescue services and so forth. I think that's way forward, absolutely. And you mentioned about the Readiness Act development now in Finland. We are now looking into those so-called speed line improvements that should be made in our Readiness Act because of the, let's say, changed security environment. And as you said, we are now looking into that in Finland. And that's one area, how to do in a governmental level the societal safety and security, comprehensive security work. We can learn from each other as a system level, and also when it comes to legislation improvement, for example. Perhaps this was somewhat a start in this discussion. Very nice to be here.
Thank you, Kimmo. And Charlotte, do you share this picture that Kimmo is painting of the very good and seamless cooperation between our countries?
First of all, thank you for the opportunity to be here. And yes, of course, I share a lot of what Kimmo is saying, and you can see that we are smiling. And we're not smiling for the reason why we have come even closer together, but I think we are smiling because we really feel that there's such a collegial collaboration taking place already, and we know that we will continue to build on that. And you need to be in close contact through difficult times like this. So yes, there are a lot of exchange and similarities, but I also think it is important to kind of admit that after the Cold War, World War, we kind of took different routes in Finland and Sweden, and a lot of the civil defense, if you will, were kind of dismantled in Sweden, and priorities were kind of different. And I hope, and I think we will be right when we continue to work together to see that what you still do and have maintained is important for us to learn from when we talk about everything from stockpiling to, well, the whole system. But what we kind of did instead, a lot of innovation, creative solutions, the private sector work on not modernizing civil defense, but modernization of society. I think when we work together now, the differences in approaches will also be a strength. And if we're open to that, and we are, I think that we can fast track a lot of what we are discussing and what we are asked to fast track. So I'm really looking forward to that. And we have already discussions around how do we build a system if we were to build it today when it comes to, for instance, Axel, the kind of security of supply. Is stockpiling the modern way? Well, maybe there is for Sweden, and I know actually I have something for you. Gothenburg, the second biggest city in Sweden, actually have decided to build its own stockpile, for preparedness, and because of the awareness of the situation. So stockpiling is still something we need, and probably society at large need to review the importance of stockpiling. But the combination with new ways of working, and instead of just in time, maybe we will have to work on just in case. So I think we will see that how we can combine our experiences.
I can't really remember during my very long time working with Finnish-Swedish cooperation that Finland and Sweden have been so much discussed in the media, both in Sweden and in Finland, as the past couple of months. And you were also referring to rehearsals that are being conducted together. And you were both praising the good cooperation between our countries. But yet also I think it's important to be honest and admit that not always everything goes in the best possible way. And during the COVID pandemic, we also saw that there are also difficulties in actually reaching out and helping each other. And Charlotte, if you would look at how we can support each other in various crises and natural disasters, how can we do that better, very concretely in the future?
And I thank you for mentioning the pandemic, because I think it is an example where we started off as a globe almost to work well together to get vaccines there. But then we started to work very differently. And honestly, there is, the Nordic cooperation did not improve during COVID. And here we are in a situation where I think the Nordic cooperation is needed. And we are helped by the fact that we need each other now, because otherwise we might have been a little bit drawn, apart rather than together. So I think we should not repeat that. So, and here, one of the things that I think is important for us is to obviously even closer share the situation awareness. So, what's actually our interpretation of the situation. We have discussed earlier on that it's so similar, the way we describe what is happening, the consequences of the Ukraine invasion. It's so similar in the two different countries. And if we continue to share the situation analysis, compare the direction, then our systems will find each other. And that's also where I think we just need to also think about how our different people, people in Sweden reacted very, very, very strongly the 25th of February, obviously around Ukraine, but they were so worried because they didn't know anything about what will happen to me, where is my shelter? And they started to talk about that. And I think their belief was that Sweden is worse off than any country in the world because of our dismantled system. Had we known that the Finland that we looked to also had the same reaction from the public, that where is my shelter and can I bring my dog and all of that. And what I'm getting at is that if we can compare notes and share communication and the narratives, because I actually think that we are helped in Sweden by comparing notes with Finland like this, but also in the public, and show that we actually learn from each other and that we are not alone, we are together. And practically, there are a lot of things we can discuss. We will continue to do so. One thing that I do think is underestimated is the importance in crisis to have access to each other. So Kimmo and I need our, SMS messages, or we need to know that we can really find each other, and on all kind of levels and all expertise. And that's why we are here now, to get to know each other, even deeper, because we won't have time to be bureaucrats. We really need to take action, and that's where the kind of human relationship also is very concrete, if you ask me.
Oh, And Kimmo, what other barriers do we need to actually get rid of in order to have concrete, good assistance to each other when the crisis hits?
Okay, that list could be if based on the legislation and different kinds of variations of the systems, that could be rather long, and what kind of barriers. But I think Charlotte put it excellently. We just had a meeting and discussed on the how whenever we had a new situation in pandemic. We now have a second new situation with the security environmental change, and it seems so that one has to change and adapt while running, and one has to do it together in societal, in a national level. And I think that we will be learning each other, like Charlotte described, also when it comes to bilateral cooperation. What can we do with the open mind and with the idea that we have to do it together, and it's a very let's say, even though we started by describing minor let's say differences in our systems, the socio-economical, the societal structure, the overall situation in Finland and Sweden, it's pretty much the same. So even though we have differences in our case, we can most certainly learn from those areas where we are perhaps on ahead of each other, and then we can benefit from changing information. For instance, at the moment we are looking very much deeply on how Sweden evaluated its civil preparedness system as a whole and made a very impressive report, and now is developing its civil preparedness system with a good plan. That's something that we have been looking very deeply in. The Center for Psychological Defense, for instance, is something very interesting, and we are now discussing a lot because of the division of responsibility in different authorities. Should we do something perhaps more in a general, let's say, the whole of societal level, and learn from this experience which is with each other? And just perhaps say that in order to be, let's say, strengthen our cooperation and the ways of future, I think that we could study, we can do scientific even programs, studies jointly, perhaps exchange of effort on that. Sweden will do that, Finland will do that, and we will combine our forces, planning together in different kinds of scenarios, exercising together in different kinds of scenarios, communications, information distribution. We discussed on what kind of a narrative is going on at the moment with this crisis, and how can we learn from each other in that. And for instance, being one area of cooperation. So there's a lots of things, even though we are happy what is our history in cooperation, but I think that in the future, in many reasons and arguments is for that we could, and we have lots of potential in facing those challenges together.
Let's move then to another very concrete area of civil defense, the security of supplies. And as Charlotte was already mentioning, Sweden is now in the process of rebuilding its capacity in this area. And this is also an area which is very much linked to the private sector. And if there is one area that is integrated between Finland and Sweden, it is the private sector. I think we have some 600 companies that are either jointly owned or partly jointly owned. Can you tell us how are you going to develop the cooperation with Finland, and maybe also with the private sector in this area? And I also would like to bring in
you should.
Alex in this, because I think this is a really interesting area for us to cooperate in.
So I will try to be brief. So how will you develop Finland and the private sector? What an easy task. So no, but I know. So more seriously, we really have something to be inspired by in the Finnish model. I think what the deficit in Sweden is that we have been working, you know, the official kind of in isolation too long, from a private sector that is really willing to play, and obviously they want to know about the rules of engagement. So it's not as easy as that, but we will kind of learn from Finland, but also develop together, because we think that making sure that we can work with the Swedish-Finnish companies and continue to kind of 1 + 1 = 5. Will be, you know, really important and inspiring. And Axel, I want to share one thing with you before, because I think you should talk about this more than I. During the COVID pandemic, the Swedish private sector knocked on the door saying that, you know, we can actually contribute here, but we don't find our ways in. And 4 companies, ABB, Volvo, Mölnlycke, and Saab, came together with agencies, and they kind of said, we found a way into the pandemic when we completely shifted the production to PPE, to things that were needed in the pandemic. And now they, together with us, they are developing a model on what we call flexible preparedness, with the private sector as the driver. And we hope to be able to share that model and of course learn and hopefully scale that model. And we should do that obviously with you, and not in isolation. So, but please, you should talk about this. So.
Thank you very much, Charlotte. And first, let me start by presenting the apologies of our CEO Janne Känkänen, who was supposed to participate, but he was held back at the ongoing negotiations on ministerial level on the current crisis. But first of all, let me start by saying also from our part, thank you for the invitation and for being able to discuss these important topics. I think Charlotte just brought up, and Kimmo as well, important subjects and points of cooperation which have a relevance also from a security of supply point of view. And of course, the cooperation with the private sector is absolutely fundamental to this work. But on a broader level, I'd like to start by saying that from the Finnish point of view, it's fascinating and very important for us to follow how Sweden is now developing the civil defense and as part of that, the security of supply, because you're building something new. You're starting from an empty plate, or not quite empty, of course. You still have a legacy, and you still have very good know-how about it, but to a much larger degree, you can start something new. We have a traditional system that we've been updating, and we're following very closely and with interest the kind of solutions that you will come up with, because it's quite probable that you will come up with solutions that are, you know, different from what we have, and that we can take a lot of inspiration from and also perhaps apply in Finland. And that perhaps brings me to the what we see as the fundamental parts of security of supply, of which, of course, the stockpiling is one, the material preparedness, and perhaps the more traditional sense of security of supply. The English term is very material, whereas perhaps the Swedish and Finnish term for this activity, försörjningsberedskap, huoltovarmuus, is more going towards the idea of maintaining functions. And that is the other equally important part of security of supply, that you maintain the critical functions. You keep the wheels rolling, you keep the economy going, and you keep society functioning also during crisis. And that requires more than material stockpiling. It requires continuity planning. It requires an constantly ongoing debate and discussion with the operators that actually supply our societies with the functions that we rely on. And they're, to a very large extent, private sector operators. Hence, the importance of the dialogue and the cooperation with the private sector. And I think the initiative on flexible preparedness is very interesting. It's a new opening. It opens up for a lot of possible mutual interest also from a Finnish point of view. In addition to this, I'd like to say a few more areas where we really see a reason to intensify our cooperation, which of course has been long-standing. NESA and MSB has a strategic framework for cooperation. Finland and Sweden has a state agreement on security of supply, which is now, as a matter of fact, being activated again, or at least the steering group for this state agreement. And I think that's a very important indication of how important it is in this current environment, in this current security environment, to go back to the concrete cooperation that we used to have. And NESA has been cooperating with the predecessors of MSB as well in these areas. And we can go back to that. And there's a lot that we can intensify. Information exchange is one. And I think it's important to also look at even exchanging classified information. In the light of the current security situation, I think it's inevitable. And the other thing is that we need to look at the concrete cooperation. We need to find areas of specific concrete cooperation where we can go deep into the actual challenges facing that our societies and economies face, and where we share perhaps vulnerabilities, and where we can look at how we can support each other in solving them.
May I here
Please.
just ask you, Axel, in the light of the war, Russia's war in Ukraine, and also with the potential prospect that both Finland and Sweden soon will be applying for NATO membership, how will that change your area of work? What will it bring?
Well, this is, of course, still a speculative question.
It is a speculative question, yes.
And it's important to keep in mind that that this is an ongoing discussion. But of course, as we all know, there is a strengthening and deepening debate in Finland, also on the political level, on the possibility of applying for NATO membership. But in the field of security of supply and civil preparedness, or resilience, as we prefer to call it, perhaps, Finland and Sweden has already been cooperating with NATO quite deeply and quite closely together. So Finland and Sweden has, as a matter of fact, been seen as a, almost as one actor in the context of civil preparedness in the NATO context, of course, as partner nations, but as very close partner nations who have been able to provide more than they've taken. We've been able to indeed support NATO in developing the type of civil preparedness and resilience work that is now being done. And I think Charlotte would agree that that's a role that would be reasonable and necessary to continue, also potentially as members.
Because I got the same question asked by the Swedish media, and I think the kind of hypothesis when you were asked is that there will be a huge change. But what we kind of see is that because of, I'm not going to repeat what Axel said, but it's going to be important that the kind of very same requirements, if you will, that we have been working with in the partnership with NATO is what we work with domestically and in the Nordic context. I mean, there are some differences in words, but if you think about it, it's really the same agenda. And what we need to do is to realize it will take more resources, at least to start with. because you need to be present everywhere. But in the long run, we might be even more effective and efficient. And I'm just talking about the civil preparedness. I'm not talking about the other parts of the NATO membership, but I think we can manage that in a constructive and good way, and even learn, more and work at scale. So there are opportunities in going forward.
Kimmo, you want to come in here?
Yep. Just to state that everything Axel and Charlotte has said absolutely true, and just to perhaps say that during the years of partnership, the civil emergency planning, the civil emergency, civil preparedness side, perhaps it's not that known in publicly that we've been doing that for decades in a very, very, let's say, appreciated partners in a way. And I think that in NATO looks very much and has been looking in different formats of 30+2, for instance, Finland and Sweden being there together in various examples of perhaps some kind of a, let's say, a good model of comprehensive security or how the societal preparedness work is done. So if that should come into place in a deepening and in the future, if that's the way through membership, that will intensify, and but perhaps there's areas also we have to look together which kind of a cooperation means that develops that. But I think that just to say one thing, when Axel mentioned that also when it comes to our national emergency supply system, one area that our Nessa and Axel and his troops has been very, very good at is to involve the citizens also, and thinking about the citizens as actors when it comes to whatever kind of safety and security, even the let's say the most severe one. And there's also a pooling for self-preparedness with our national volunteer organizations, and involving with various kind of actors in order to develop of how the households should be more prepared in material wise, but also in other kinds of support. And that one, I think, area also Charlotte has underlined the importance of the public and how can we be strong as a society, and that needs to be taken into consideration how the people can do and what they can do and how can they be better in preparedness. Yeah,
Hanaholmen did a public survey both in Finland and Sweden a couple of years ago, where we asked the public in both countries what are the most important areas for our countries to cooperate in. And 58% of both the population in Finland and in Sweden said security and defense. And I assume if we would ask the same question today, it would not be a smaller number. So I think you're very right in your points.
It was the same amount, the same
percentage. Exactly the same.
It's fascinating.
It was very fascinating, yeah. So you all talk about the importance of becoming even more concrete in this situation. So will we see shared stocks and production lines at the Finnish-Swedish border in Haparanda Tornio, or what's your vision?
I can perhaps lead. Thank you. I'll share this microphone for a change. I think share common stockpiling. I wouldn't rule that out, but I don't know if that's the right place to start. I think the right place to start would be, first of all, sharing the situational awareness. And through sharing the situational awareness, also identifying the common shortfalls, the common bottlenecks, the common flows, flows of services and goods that we both rely on, and perhaps even, interdependencies. Where is perhaps Finland dependent on Swedish operators and actors, and where vice versa, Sweden would be dependent on Finnish. And by identifying these, then I think we can get to the level of seeing, is there something that we need to plan for together? For example, through stockpiling or through redundant systems or other issues. Another topic, of course, is logistics and strengthening the logistical infrastructure, transport infrastructure between our countries. And there's currently a lot of work ongoing, that particularly for the rail connection up in Tornio-Haparanda region. So these are actually ongoing projects already, both related to infrastructure, but also then I think through the identification of common shortfalls and bottlenecks, we can get also to a lot of other concrete, interesting and very fruitful areas of cooperation. But perhaps you would like to fill in on it?
I'm always tempted to talk a lot, so I shouldn't. I think one of the things that we realize altogether is that managing the system on the Swedish side and the Finnish side and together is important, because some of these discussions are not necessarily happening through us here, but another agency in Sweden or another department in Finland. So getting to know, and I said that before, getting to know who to invite to, for instance, the awareness, the situation awareness, because we all need to share that awareness and the direction, and then we can, work concretely in the system. Unless we take the opportunity now to do that first part, I think we run the risk of, a boat instead of a train. I'm joking, but I mean, it's really, and I think when we combine, there's so much on both sides that we can tap into if we bring the right competencies and people to this table. And that's concrete, but I know it sounds abstract and boring, but management is super important.
So time is running, so let's move to the last topic, cybersecurity, and maybe I would ask Sauli here to start. How does Finland and Sweden work to strengthen and develop the cooperation in the area of cybersecurity right now?
Thank you. First of all, great to be here as well. But as time is running, I will cut into the actual question. The digital societies of Finland and Sweden are very similar to most extent, which tends to mean that we have common problems. We also have common solutions, and it didn't start yesterday. It started a long time ago when it comes to cyber, which means that we have, over time, our organizations have existed around cybersecurity, have existed for a long time already. We have built pragmatic ways to work together, which we have improved gradually as we have identified potential opportunities for improvement. So we already do operational cooperation. When we have a common problem, we work together. When Sweden has a problem Finland can help with, we work together as well, and vice versa. We share methods of operation, best practices, development topics and ideas, things like how to measure in an analytical way the preparedness or the capacities of our critical sectors to defend themselves. We work together on sharing information on exercises and overall sharing of information also around the topics. So there's like softer cooperation principles, things, best practices, and then there's also, when it's needed, there's more hard cooperation. When we have an incident and we share information and we work together to resolve it. So we've gone pretty far in terms of doing these things.
Do you share, Charlotte, this description, or would you like to add something?
Two mics, I just need one, so thank you. I really share that, and I'm so pleased to know, you said early on that I'm quite new in this role, so there's a lot that's been done, and some things you kind of feel, phew, it's already working. That's it. And I really think on this area, it's kind of cybersecurity and cyber, it's not the case that everybody we talk to knows what we talk about. It's like a little bit of even trendy in the media. So everything with cyber is like described like that. We need to make it, to popularize what we mean. And knowing that we share is so important. We do a lot of combined exercise, which I want to add to what you said. We have a big events on the Finnish side, on the Swedish side, where we learn together. And one of the things that we've been asked by the Swedish government to do is to inform and we will launch an information campaign on what's my part as an individual in the space of cybersecurity. Do I need to change my password? What do I need to know to be part of what is described as cybersecurity? So we are kind of educating broadly around the topic, but we are also really developing the expertise together with Sweden and Finland. And this is where I think we can continue exercise, sharing, and perhaps also the communication around the field as such.
So critical infrastructure in Finland and Sweden are really connected and have a lot of interdependencies as well, as we know. And as we've seen lately, many systems and critical functions in society are dependent on functioning IT systems. So we live very special times also right now. So how can Finland and Sweden work together to actually make sure, what exactly in this specific historical situation that we are, that we improve cybersecurity IT systems? Do we have special cooperation going on right now in this period of big uncertainty?
We've had a
Sauli, you should start.
Yes, thank you. In terms of how much we are in contact with each other across respective organizations, I think we've had a special cooperation for the past 10 years or more. So that already operates. It is very true that we are most probably in the Nordic countries more dependent on each other than in some other contexts. The Nordic countries are to some extent an island. We have dependencies towards the Europe, obviously, when it comes to cyber. We have cross-border dependencies between the countries, and then we have cross-sector dependencies on cybersecurity within the respective countries. And I can see we will be discussing these, by the way. I think in approximately 2 weeks there will be a meeting. But what I think now immediately, where we have obvious opportunities, is how we communicate and what we communicate about, especially when we see common problems, common incidents, also potentially common preparedness. Certain critical organizations, they work Nordically, they provide services Nordically. And we've seen in the cyberspace that an incident in one country can impact many countries. That tends to, cyberspace has less borders than the physical world. So the communication, the sharing of the situational awareness, I believe that's where we can and should immediately step up and discuss common plans and strategies on how to actually execute on that.
So we have a question here actually, and this connection from the audience, the virtual audience, asking about if the cyber security cooperation is between governments only, or is also the private sector exchanging information, and how do you work with the private sector in this area?
It's both between the governmental agencies, obviously, as we are here representing the government. But what we see is also a lot of cross-sector collaboration between the actual critical companies. Part of the companies, they actually operate on both countries. Then the cooperation is very much built in. But it's also so that the sectors, the critical sectors, they exchange information between Finland and Sweden, and actually even more widely than that, about the best practices, what we are good at, what are the common problems we have. If someone's figured out a genius solution to a common problem to improve, the sharing of this knowledge is the power, because it's always easier to copy a solution from someone who's already learned it from, who had the same problem for you. People should keep in mind.
Charlotte, you want to come in?
I think overall on the Swedish side, I think we can do more to, and it's not just cyber, it's overall, bring in the private sector. And that goes for everything we do. But what we have found, I think, is that the private sector is not always willing to share on cyber. Because it's the competition out there, and you don't want to relieve and reveal. So I think there are also part of cybersecurity is also what you don't want to talk about. And you said it, Sauli, we can help each other to communicate a bit better with the public. So what shouldn't be a secret is communicated about, and what has perhaps to be more of a secret is the minor part of what we do, but the bigger part of what we do, we should communicate about it. And this is where I think we can invite the private sector, at least in Sweden, more than we've done. And there's a lot of ongoing discussions on both sides to make that happen. And there are models on the international arena where the private sector feel that they are served by the government on this area, because they do platforms and networks and so on. So I think we can continue to inspire each other, but also be inspired by others working with private sector. Do you agree?
Thank you. And I'd just like to also, in addition to this, raise the fact that the critical infrastructure that we share that enables this interconnectedness. Protecting and securing this critical infrastructure is something also which is being developed on a European level, where the European Commission has presented a directive both for the network information security, the NIS2 directive, and the critical entities resilience directive, which to me are excellent initiatives in developing a common baseline, a common minimum standard throughout Europe, where which then enables us to know and better be able to rely on the preparedness of our peers, our neighboring nations, and of course in a Finnish and Swedish context, I think this minimum standard is already beyond what standards the European initiatives are aiming at. But nevertheless, it is important to know that, of course, we're not only reliant on each other, we're also relying on the rest of Europe and the rest of the world. And here I think also the Finnish and the Swedish coordination of our points of view and engagements with these European level initiatives, EU, but also NATO, as we discussed before, is quite important in the field of cybersecurity. This is perhaps even more prevalent. Thank you.
All brought forward the importance of including civil society and citizens in everything actually that we do in civil defense. But when it comes to cybersecurity, what's your advice to people in Finland and Sweden? How can we protect ourselves?
The story is a bit long, but luckily it's simple. It's been told over time many times, and it hasn't changed when it comes to us as the normal people. It's actually the advice that was valid a year ago. It was valid at Christmas time, and it's valid today. Those core messages are still the right means to prepare for in terms of cyber. It's your usual stuff. It's your passwords, store them safely, use a different password in different services. If you don't remember them, use a password manager. I could go on for a long time, but luckily they are the simple common core practices that still apply. Perhaps what has changed now is that now they're even more important, and everybody, cybersecurity is very network. Denial of service attacks, they come from compromised computers. If your computer is compromised or any other digital device is compromised, it's a potential source of a denial of service attack, which then can, at least to some extent, harm the society. And therefore, following these well-known, or at least well-communicated, I hope they're well-known, guidelines and instructions are now more important, because everybody has a part in keeping the cyberspace clean and defendable to a certain extent, so that we can protect it.
Do you agree, Charlotte, for the Swedish population as well? Same advice?
Yeah, absolutely. And there's a list of passwords, backups, but also perhaps be more aware. So we're kind of in between cyber and disinformation as well. So yeah, but I would certainly agree. And for some people, this sounds too simple. Is cybersecurity about my password? So we need to kind of describe it as it starts somewhere and it go, the complexity is higher for a company and all of that. But we need to communicate this. And just, when you're asked to do something with your computer to kind of 14 plus 1 or 15 plus 1, do it. I mean, there's many things you just don't do, and now you have to do it. Yeah, so I agree. I just had to say something.
So, we are approaching the end of this discussion, but since we are sitting here in the Finnish-Swedish Cooperation Center, Hanaholmen, and we have defined in our strategy that we think Finnish-Swedish cooperation has succeeded when we see that the next step is taken. So I would be curious to learn from all of you, what is the next step that you personally are going to take in order to strengthen and improve the cooperation between Finland and Sweden in civil defense?
Can I start? Well, the next steps, I think we've already mentioned quite a few of them. Sharing of our situational awareness, finding concrete areas for cooperation where we really go into the nitty-gritties and identify what the solutions should be, and then build those solutions together. And John, stockpiling was mentioned, but there are many other alternatives of these concrete types of cooperations. But then I think also it's important to maintain this dialogue also on the political level, and to keep reminding ourselves and our societies of the importance of maintaining also the civil side of shoring up and securing that somebody who wants to hurt our societies doesn't get to do it, and it doesn't know how to do it because we thought ahead. And I think thinking ahead is one thing that we can do together.
So there's been a series of meetings between Sweden and Finland, and I have taken part in many already. And so the first thing that I want to do when returning to Sweden is to kind of take stock on what has been actually mentioned by the governments and agencies now on next steps, and make sure that we have an agenda together, which is kind of anchored, between agencies and governments. And I also, your list is what we have been discussing, that concrete list. But I also think about the exercises that are already planned. They should also include this shared situation analysis and work around this situation and not just exercise, if you see what I mean. So I will take an interest in how do we plan the exercises that are already planned to make sure that they also bring in this new kind of context in which we work together. And then finally, I'm also going to look into that we connect the people that should be connected in the system. So over to you, Kimmo.
Thank you, Charlotte. Thank you, Axel. Just put briefly, because excellent things already said. I think the adaptation of the future situations is one key thing that we should have a open mind, and what kind of it's a myriads of details that we can do, but the basic idea that we are in this together and we try to do as much cooperation as possible. And one thing, last summer when we had a Kalajoki forest fire, MSP's director, Charlotte's predecessor, called me and said, Kimmo, do you need anything? And when Charlotte started, I called her and said, Charlotte, if there's anything that you need, please call. Is there anything that, and just to connect the right people that they can call whenever it seems that Sweden has something to, let's say, we can provide, and vice versa. I think that's a marvelous start.
A lot's been already mentioned. I will echo the contacts and communication. It's too late to start seeking for the contacts when you need the contact. It's good to have your phone. And luckily we've already built a lot of phone books over the time, but we need to maintain and perhaps even intensify that. In more general, I think what we need to do is to continue to pragmatic cooperation we've had, perhaps intensify that as well. Choose our topics on which we develop in a way which is linked to the current context, which has always been what we've done. We've had a list of agenda. These are the things we want to cooperate on. We've looked into it, thought that, okay, this was a topical thing a year ago. It's no more. We need to continue doing that. We choose wisely on the topics we work with. We actually act on them. We don't just talk and cooperate to cooperate, but we act on them as we've always done, and we adapt. We can only plan so far forward, and then we adapt, and that's why we have those contacts, so that we can agree that we are now wiser in June than we were in May. Let's figure out how to adjust our direction.
So on this positive and action-orientated notes, I want to thank you all very much for this discussion, to be continued, because this is an area that will not go away for a long time on our agenda. And connecting people, the right people, sharing the scenarios, that's exactly what the Hanaholmen initiative is about. And we will continue with that as well. So thank you so much, and good luck with the next step.